The leather of the booth was old. It was worn smooth by decades of men like him. Men who sat with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the door. Antonio Falcone ran a thumb over a crack in the deep red upholstery. A map of 100 deals made, 1,000 loyalties tested. This was his corner of the world. Trattoria Sofia. Named for a memory. Named for a promise. Outside, the city screamed and fought and bled. A chaotic symphony of ambition and despair. In here, there was only the gentle clink of silverware on porcelain, the low murmur of quiet conversation, and the rich scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes. It was his sanctuary. His office. His church. The rules were simple because he was a simple man. He dealt in respect, not currency. He traded in loyalty, not commodities. And in his house, under his roof, there was an order to things. A rhythm. He was a creature of that rhythm. Every evening at 9, after the dinner rush had softened to a contented hum, he would have his espresso. Black, no sugar. It would be brought by the evening waitress. For the past 6 months, that waitress had been a girl named Ilara. She was quiet. Efficient. Almost invisible, which was a skill in his world. She moved between the tables like a ghost, a whisper of motion that never disturbed the delicate ecosystem of his restaurant. But there was one thing about her that was not invisible. One small, defiant act of warmth in a cold world. On every receipt, next to the final tally, she drew a heart. It was not a sloppy, rushed thing. It was a perfect, small heart, drawn with a single, confident stroke of her pen. It was a signature. A tiny piece of herself left behind on every table. Antonio had noticed it the first time, of course. He noticed everything. The way a man's hand trembled when he lied. The flicker of fear in a rival's eyes. The dust on a bottle of wine that meant the sommelier was getting lazy. A heart on a receipt was a glaring anomaly. At first, he'd thought it was frivolous. Unprofessional. But day after day, week after week, the heart appeared. A constant. A tiny, silent greeting. It became part of the rhythm. The espresso. The bill. The heart. It reminded him of another artist. Another girl with a gentle soul. Sophia. Tonight, the rhythm broke. He saw her approaching his table. Her steps were not the usual light glide. They were heavy. Faltering. Her shoulders were hunched, a defensive posture he knew all too well. It was the posture of prey. She placed the small ceramic cup and the saucer on his table. Her hand shook. A single drop of black coffee splashed onto the white porcelain. She flinched, her eyes wide with panic, as if she had committed an unforgivable sin. "My apologies, Mr. Falcone," she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. He said nothing. He simply watched her. She placed the small leather billfold on the table beside the cup. She did it too quickly. Her movements were jerky, desperate to be finished, to escape. She turned to leave. His voice was low, not loud, but it stopped her as effectively as a physical barrier. "Wait." She froze, her back to him. He could see the tension in her neck, the rigid line of her spine. Marco, his loyal shadow, who stood perpetually near the kitchen entrance, took half a step forward, ready to dismiss her, to smooth over this breach in protocol. Antonio raised a single finger from his table. A small gesture. Marco stopped. Understood. He melted back into the shadows. The girl, Ilara, turned around slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes cast down, fixed on the floor. She looked like a child expecting a scolding. He opened the billfold. He looked at the slip of paper. Espresso. For dollars. And below it, empty white space. No heart. The absence of it screamed at him. It was a silent alarm, a gaping hole in the fabric of his evening. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. He looked from the stark white paper up to her frightened face. He saw the faint, dark smudge of a bruise high on her cheekbone, a pathetic attempt to hide it with makeup. He saw the terror swimming in her eyes, a deep, drowning pool of it. This was not the girl who drew hearts. This was a cornered animal. And she was in his house. Stay with me until the end, because what was about to unfold in that quiet Italian restaurant was more than just a rescue. It was a reckoning. If you believe that the strong have a duty to protect the weak, and that sometimes justice needs a helping hand, then show your support for stories like this. Like this video, and make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We read every single one, and it means the world to know how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. Antonio Falcone was not a man given to sentiment. He had carved his empire out of the city's bedrock with little more than his will and a reputation for quiet, unshakable resolve. His name was spoken in whispers in boardrooms and back alleys. He was a relic of a bygone era, a man who believed in honor among thieves, a code that was rapidly becoming extinct. The new breed was different. They were loud, flashy, driven by a bottomless greed that he found distasteful. They had no respect for the old ways, for the unspoken rules that kept their world from spiraling into pure chaos. One of those rules, his most sacred rule, was simple. The innocent are off limits. Women, children, civilians. People who were not in the game. You did not touch them. You did not use them. You did not frighten them. To do so was a sign of weakness, a failure of character that Antonio could not abide. It was a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. This belief was not born from some abstract moral philosophy. It was forged in the crucible of a loss so profound it had hollowed out a part of his soul. His daughter, Sophia. She had been like this girl, Ilara. Full of a quiet light. She saw beauty everywhere. Her hands were always smudged with charcoal or paint. She would leave little drawings for him to find. A sketch of a bird on a napkin. A cartoon of him looking grumpy, tucked into his coat pocket. Small, perfect hearts. She had been taken from him not by a bullet or a blade, but by a fever that burned too brightly, an enemy he could not threaten, could not intimidate, could not negotiate with. He had all the power in the world, but he had been powerless to save her. The trattoria was her monument. A quiet, warm place in a cold world. A place she would have loved. And every person who worked under its roof, whether they knew it or not, was under the protection of her memory. He looked at Ilara, at the trembling chin she fought to keep steady. He saw Sophia's ghost in her eyes. The heart, he said again, his voice a low rumble. You always draw the heart. Why not tonight? Tears welled in her eyes, thick and fast. She bit her lip, a desperate attempt to hold them back. In his world, tears were a liability. They were a confession. It's nothing, sir, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. I was just in a hurry. It was a weak lie. A child's lie. They both knew it. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. An invitation that was not a request. No one sat at his table unless invited. Ever. She hesitated, her fear of him warring with her fear of disobeying. She slowly, cautiously, sank into the chair, perching on the edge as if ready to bolt. You are in my house, he said, his voice calm, measured. He was giving her an anchor. A promise. Here, you are safe. Tell me what is wrong. The dam of her composure broke. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through the makeup on her cheek. Then another. She choked back a sob, her hands twisting in the starched white fabric of her apron. I can't, she whispered. He'll kill him. He? Antonio's eyes narrowed. Who is a he? She told him. The story tumbled out in a torrent of hushed, terrified words. Her father. A good man with a weakness for the cards. A debt that had spiraled out of control. The money wasn't owed to a reasonable man, not to one of the old families who understood limits. It was owed to a shark. A man named Victor. Victor was new money. Russian muscle. He had no code. No honor. He preyed on the desperate, charging impossible interest and using brutality as his primary business tool. The debt was $50,000. An impossible sum. Her father had missed the last payment. So Victor had come to their small apartment. He had hurt her father. Not badly. Just enough to make a point. And then he had seen Ilara. He had offered her a new deal. The debt would be cleared. In exchange for her. He had given her a deadline. Midnight. Tonight. He was coming here, to the restaurant, at closing time to collect his payment. He said he would own me, she whispered, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. He told me not to do anything stupid. Not to tell anyone. Or he would finish what he started with my father. Antonio listened. He did not interrupt. He let her pour out the entire ugly story. His face remained a mask of calm, but inside, a cold, familiar rage began to uncoil. It was a controlled fury, the kind he had not allowed himself to feel in many years. This Victor had broken the rule. He had come into his territory. He had terrorized a civilian. He had threatened a young woman. And he planned to walk into Antonio's sanctuary to claim his prize. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. The disrespect, absolute. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the table. The only sound was the quiet, ragged hitch of her breathing. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. She had not come to him for help. She was simply confessing, unburdening herself to the powerful, terrifying man who had shown her an unexpected moment of concern. She expected nothing from him. Antonio looked at the receipt again. The empty space where the heart should have been. It was a symbol of everything this animal, Victor, had tried to extinguish. The girl's hope. Her spirit. Her small, defiant kindness. He remembered Sophia, in her last days, her hands too weak to hold a pencil, asking him to draw a heart for her. Just a little one, Papa. His own powerlessness then had been a bitter pill. He was not powerless now. The internal debate was brief, a flicker of cold logic against a wildfire of paternal instinct. Getting involved was messy. It was loud. It would attract attention he did not need. The smart play was to give the girl money, send her away, and let the problem disappear on its own. But that was the logic of a businessman. Not a father. And this Victor had made the fatal mistake of reminding Antonio Falcone what it felt like to be a father. He made his choice. He folded the receipt carefully, creasing it with a sharp, definitive motion, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked at Ilara. His gaze was steady, absolute. The fear in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a fragile, dawning hope. Go to the kitchen, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Find Maria. Help her with the late-night prep. Stay in the back. Do not come out, do not speak to anyone, until I come for you. It was not a suggestion. It was a benediction. A shield. She nodded, speechless. She stood up, her movement still uncertain, and walked toward the kitchen doors. Before she pushed through them, she looked back at him one last time. For the first time that night, he saw not a victim, but the girl who drew hearts. Antonio watched until the doors swung shut behind her. Then he turned his attention to Marco, who had been watching the entire exchange with a carefully neutral expression. But Antonio knew his man. He could see the questions in Marco's eyes. The boss was breaking his own rules of non-involvement. Antonio didn't need to explain. He just needed to give orders. Get the boys, he said, his voice now stripped of all warmth. It was cold, hard iron. I need 12 of them. Tell them to wear street clothes. No suits. No hardware visible. I want them to look like customers enjoying a late dinner. Spread them out. 2 at the bar. The rest at the tables near the front. I want them here in 20 minutes. Marco nodded once. And the guest? His name is Victor, Antonio said. He will be here at closing. He believes he is coming to collect a debt. He paused, letting the unspoken reality hang in the air. He is wrong. Marco left without another word. Antonio took a slow sip of his now cold espresso. He pulled out his phone, an old, simple flip phone, not a smartphone. He dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. Luca, Antonio said. There was no greeting. None was needed. I need information. A loan shark. Calls himself Victor. Russian, I think. New to the game. I want everything you can find. Where he sleeps, who he reports to, what he fears. I want to know the names of his pets. I want it before I finish this coffee. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. He sat alone in his booth, the restaurant slowly emptying around him. The last of the real customers paid their bills and drifted out into the night, leaving behind the comfortable quiet of a closing restaurant. But tonight, the quiet was different. It was not peaceful. It was the calm before a storm. The plan was not complicated. It did not need to be. Men like Victor were simple creatures, driven by greed and ego. They understood only one language, overwhelming force. Antonio's strategy was to speak that language more fluently than Victor ever could. The restaurant's front door opened and closed, admitting small groups of men. They did not look at Antonio. They did not acknowledge each other. They moved to their assigned spots with a quiet, practiced ease. A young couple, holding hands, took a table by the window. They were 2 of his best men, killers with the faces of choir-boys. A group of 4 men, laughing and talking about a football game, sat at a larger table in the center. They looked like construction workers unwinding after a long week. Their hands were calloused and hard, capable of breaking bone as easily as snapping breadsticks. 2 men in sharp, casual jackets took seats at the bar, ordering expensive whiskey. They were his specialists in persuasion and removal. Within 15 minutes, Trattoria Sofia was filled with 12 of the most dangerous men in the city. To any outsider, it would look like the restaurant was having an unexpectedly busy late night. But there was a stillness to them. A predatory patience. They were a pride of lions pretending to be sheep. Antonio remained in his booth, a king on his throne, observing his kingdom. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. The trap was set. Every man in the room was a piece of it, a single, coordinated part of a machine designed for one purpose: to erase a problem. At 5 minutes to midnight, the bell above the door chimed. 3 men walked in. The one in the middle was large, dressed in a suit that was too tight and too shiny. He used a cheap arrogance, his eye scanning the room with a predator's dismissive gaze. Victor. He saw a nearly full restaurant and sneered, annoyed that he would have an audience. He saw an old man sitting alone in a corner booth. He did not recognize Antonio. To him, this was just some old Italian restaurant owner. An insect. He and his 2 thugs, hulking shadows who flanked him like gargoyles, began to walk toward the kitchen. Antonio's voice cut through the room. It was not loud, but it had the density of granite. That is far enough. Victor stopped. He turned, a look of amused disbelief on his face. Who the hell are you? He grunted. The dishwasher? I'm here for the girl. Tell her to come out. Antonio did not rise. He simply gestured to the chair across from him, the one Ilara had occupied. Her name is Ilara, Antonio said, his voice dangerously calm. And she is not available. Please. Sit. Victor laughed. A short, ugly sound. I don't have time for this, old man. Send out the girl, or I'll come back there and drag her out myself. And I'll break your peasant face for wasting my time. He took a step forward. "I would not do that," Antonio advised. From the table by the window, one of the choir boys scraped his chair back. A loud, jarring sound in the quiet room. Victor glanced over, irritated. The young man smiled at him. It was not a friendly smile. At the center table, the four construction workers stopped talking. Their laughter died. They turned their heads in unison, their eyes cold and flat. At the bar, the two specialists placed their whiskey glasses down on the polished wood. The click of glass on wood was perfectly synchronized. Victor was not stupid. He might have been arrogant, but he understood the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The air had become heavy, charged. He looked around the room, really looked this time. He saw it in their eyes. These were not customers. His bravado faltered. A flicker of uncertainty, then fear, crossed his face. His two thugs shifted their weight, their hands moving instinctively toward their jackets. "Don't," Antonio said, his voice a final warning. It was too late. One of the thugs reached inside his coat. It was over before it began. There was no shouting. No gunfire. Just a blur of swift, brutal, silent motion. The two men from the bar were on the thugs in an instant. One was disarmed and slammed face first into the bar, the impact knocking him unconscious. The other was choked out from behind, slumping to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. It took less than 3 seconds. Victor stood frozen, his mouth half open, his eyes wide with shock and terror. The 12 men in the room all stood up. They did not draw weapons. They did not need to. They simply stood and looked at him. The combined weight of their silent, lethal intent was a physical force. It pressed down on Victor, crushing his arrogance, suffocating his will. He was surrounded. Trapped. A wolf who had wandered into a dragon's lair. He finally turned his full attention to the old man in the booth. The quiet old man who commanded this silent army. Recognition, and a dawning, soul-deep horror, flooded his features. You're Falcone," he stammered. Antonio gave a slight nod. "You came into my house," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. He was stating a fact. A verdict. "You threatened a girl who works for me. A girl who is under my protection." He leaned forward slightly. "You told her you would own her. You put your hands on her father. You broke a rule. My rule." He let the words sink in. He let Victor understand the totality of his mistake. "Please," Victor begged, his voice cracking. All the false bravado was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man who knows he is about to die. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know she was with you. It was just business. Take the debt. Double it. I'll pay. Just let me go." Antonio looked at him with something akin to pity. The man still didn't understand. He thought this was about money. "This is not about money," Antonio said quietly. "This is about respect. You have shown none. You prey on the weak because you are weak. You use fear as a weapon because you are a coward." He gave a small, almost imperceptible signal to Marco, who had appeared at his side. "Some problems," Antonio said, his eyes never leaving Victor's, "do not require negotiation. They require removal." Marco and 2 other men took Victor by the arms. He didn't fight. He was a broken man. They dragged him, stumbling and weeping, toward the back door of the restaurant. The problem of Victor, and his 2 associates, was permanently closed. They would not be bothering anyone. Ever again. The remaining men melted away as quietly as they had arrived, leaving the restaurant empty once more. The chairs were put back in place. The fallen thugs were gone. Within minutes, it was as if nothing had ever happened. There was only Antonio, sitting alone in his booth in the silence. He waited a few moments, letting the violence drain from the air, replaced by the familiar peace of his sanctuary. Then he stood and walked to the kitchen doors. He pushed them open. Ilara was standing by a stainless steel counter, her hands white-knuckled as she gripped its edge. Maria, the stout, motherly cook, stood beside her, a protective arm around her shoulder. Ilara looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. Antonio's face was calm. He offered her a small, reassuring nod. "It is done," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute finality. "You are safe. He will not bother you or your family again." The relief that washed over her was so powerful it seemed to make her physically smaller. Her shoulders slumped, the tension of the last few days finally releasing its grip. Tears streamed down her face, but these were not tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude. Of release. "My father," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "The debt is cancelled," Antonio said, cutting her off gently. "Consider it a misunderstanding that has been corrected. I have also made an arrangement for him. A place he can go to get help for his gambling. A good place. Quiet. They will take care of him." He was not just solving the immediate threat. He was treating the disease, not just the symptom. He was giving her family a true fresh start. She stared at him, overwhelmed, unable to find the words. How can I ever repay you?" she finally managed to ask. "I will work for free. For as long as you want. I will do anything." Antonio shook his head. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded receipt from her bill. He held it out to her. "You will do no such thing," he said. "You will continue to work here, and you will accept your wages. But your debt to me is already paid." She looked at the receipt, confused. He then pulled a simple pen from his pocket and offered it to her along with the slip of paper. "Draw the heart," he said softly. Her hand trembled as she took the pen. She unfolded the receipt and laid it flat on the steel counter. With a single, slow, deliberate stroke, she drew her signature heart next to the total. It was perfect. A small, defiant symbol of her unbroken spirit. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. He took the receipt from her, folded it carefully, and placed it back in his breast pocket, over his own heart. "This," he said, tapping the pocket, "is worth more than money. This is a reminder of what is right. You have given me a gift." She looked at this quiet, powerful man, this terrifying figure from the city's underworld who had just saved her with an army of silent killers. She saw the hardness in his eyes, but she also saw the profound, unexpected kindness. The two things seemed impossible to reconcile. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question full of awe and confusion. Are you a good man?" Antonio's gaze drifted past her, to a small, faded photograph tacked to the kitchen's bulletin board. It was a picture of a smiling, dark-haired girl holding up a messy painting. A picture of Sophia. A flicker of an old, deep sadness crossed his face before he masked it once more. He looked back at Ilara. "I am what I need to be," he answered, his voice low and gravelly. "Tonight, for you, that was enough." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a plain white business card. There was no name on it. No address. Just a single phone number, printed in stark black ink. He pressed it into her hand. "This is my private number," he told her. "If anyone, and I mean anyone, ever makes you feel unsafe again, you call it. Day or night. It does not matter how small the problem seems. You call. Do you understand?" She nodded, clutching the card as if it were a holy relic. "Yes. I understand." He gave her one last, paternal look. "Go home now, Ilara. Get some rest. Your father is being taken care of. Your life is your own again. Do something beautiful with it." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing in the warm, fragrant air, a receipt with a hand-drawn heart having served as the catalyst for her salvation. 5 years later. The art gallery was bright, loud, and packed with people. Laughter and champagne flutes mingled in the air. On the pristine white walls hung a collection of paintings, vibrant and full of life. They depicted scenes of the city, but not its harshness. They captured its secret moments of beauty. An old woman feeding pigeons in the park. The reflection of neon lights in a rain-slicked street. A small, perfect heart drawn in the steam on a cafe window. The artist stood in the center of the room, talking to a group of admirers. It was Ilara. She was no longer the frightened, haunted girl from the trattoria. She was confident, poised, her eyes sparkling with passion and success. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, unshakable calm. She carried herself with the grace of someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that she was safe in the world. Her gaze drifted across the room and landed on a quiet, older man standing in the back, near the exit, half hidden in the shadows. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit. He was not looking at the art. He was looking at her. Their eyes met. Ilara excused herself from the group and made her way toward him. The crowd parted for her. When she reached him, she smiled. A genuine, radiant smile. "You came," she said, her voice full of warmth. Antonio Falcone nodded. "I said I would." "What do you think?" she asked, gesturing to the paintings around them. He looked around the room, truly seeing the art for the first time. He saw the light, the hope, the beauty she had pulled from the city's soul. "I think," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "that you did something beautiful with it." He turned to leave. "Wait," she said, touching his arm gently. "Thank you. Not just for that night. For everything." He simply nodded again and slipped out the door, disappearing back into the city he commanded. Later that night, in a small, quiet office behind the Trattoria Sofia, Antonio sat at his large mahogany desk. The room was a time capsule of his life. Old photos, leather-bound ledgers, mementos from a life lived in the shadows. On the wall behind him, in a simple, elegant black frame, hung a small, aged piece of paper. A restaurant receipt for a single espresso. In the center of it was a small, hand-drawn heart. He unlocked a drawer in his desk. Inside was a small wooden box. He opened it. It contained four other, identical receipts, each with a single, perfect heart drawn on it. Every year, on the anniversary of that night, one appeared on his desk. Left for him by a ghost who moved through his restaurant, a silent thank you. A renewal of a promise. A reminder. He looked at the framed receipt on the wall, the first one. The one without the heart had been burned long ago, its bad omen erased from the world. This one, the one she had drawn in the kitchen, was the one that mattered. True strength is not measured by the fear a man can inspire or the power he can wield. It is measured by his choices in the moments that matter. It is found in the quiet decision to protect the vulnerable, to shield the innocent, to stand as a wall against the encroaching darkness. Sometimes, the greatest act of a powerful man is not to conquer a city, but to save a single soul within it. And sometimes, the loudest statement of courage is not a roar, but the silent, steady beat of a heart that refuses to be extinguished.